All right, picture a society as this massive high-performance engine. The fuel that actually drives that engine forward, the sheer horsepower behind its growth, its innovation, and its entire future is its youth. But what happens when that fuel line gets blocked? Well, welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving into a really fascinating sociological breakdown of youth welfare, specifically looking at the situation in Bangladesh. We're going to explore exactly what happens when a society's most powerful demographic faces massive roadblocks, effectively stalling the engine of an entire nation. So, in today's Explainer, we'll be covering 5 main points: defining true youth welfare, the challenges facing rural youth, the social and moral crisis, the struggles of urban youth, and finally, pathways to meaningful solutions. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, defining true youth welfare. Before we can truly grasp the crisis, we have to establish a baseline, right? What does this term actually mean? Well, the Encyclopedia of Social Work in India gives us this fantastic, robust definition. It says youth welfare is a broad spectrum of activities which cater to the mental, moral, and physical needs of the young. Notice that last part. True youth welfare goes way, way beyond just formal schooling. It encompasses the total personal development of a young person. We're talking about physical health, moral grounding, mental resilience, the whole shebang. And who exactly are we talking about here? The stakes are incredibly high. According to the Bangladesh National Policy, youth is defined as individuals between 18 and 35 years of age. This specific demographic window, it is the absolute prime engine for any developing nation. These are the years of peak physical strength, maximum cognitive capability, and literally the highest potential for innovation. If you want to build a country, this is for sure the group you have to empower. Moving right along to Section 2, challenges facing rural youth. Empowerment is exactly where we hit our first major roadblock, particularly out in the villages. Look at this number, 31.1%. Historically, poverty has been the massive central economic roadblock that rural youth face every single day. When over 30% of a population is living below the poverty line, it means every single aspect of youth development is compromised. You can't exactly focus on your moral or mental development when your main concern is just basic survival. And that foundational poverty, it peels back to reveal another layer of the crisis. Data from the labor force survey points to a staggering youth unemployment rate of 10.6%. Agriculture used to be the traditional backbone of village life, but it just can't absorb this rapidly growing workforce anymore. There simply isn't enough farmland or traditional work to go around. Because that economic engine is basically stalled out, we see a terrible cascade of systemic failures. It's a real domino effect. There's a severe lack of specialized doctors and modern clinics. There's an absence of technical training, meaning youth can't upskill for the modern world. Plus, there are hardly any social or humanitarian organizations for them to join to build up leadership skills. In that total vacuum of education and opportunity, harmful practices like superstition and early marriages, particularly for young women, become incredibly prevalent. That brings us to Section 3, the social and moral crisis. We really have to shift our focus from just the economic deficits to the devastating toll this environment takes on a young mind. The source text explicitly identifies moral deviation as the root of emerging social problems. Think about it. When you have a massive demographic of 18 to 35-year-olds with sky-high energy, no jobs, zero recreational facilities, and no clear future, that stalled potential just ferments into deep frustration and boredom. And unfortunately, that frequently fuels terrible outcomes, like severe rural drug addiction, pushing families and the wider society further toward destruction. I mean, imagine having absolutely zero psychological support during the most confusing years of your life. There is a critical gap here. A total lack of mental counseling for 18 to 25-year-olds. This is the exact age bracket where people are making massive, life-altering decisions about their careers, marriage, and personal identity. Navigating all of that without any guidance while surrounded by poverty, it leads directly into the frustration and destructive paths we just talked about. Let's change our geography up a bit for Section 4, Struggles of Urban Youth. When we bridge these two distinct worlds, moving from the village to the city, you quickly see that urban youth face a completely different set of systemic roadblocks. They aren't dealing with the isolation of the village. Instead, they are navigating the overwhelming, chaotic complexity of city life. Let's compare the medical crises, for example. In a rural setting, the barrier is an absolute absence of doctors, right? Scarcity is the main issue. But in the city, modern high-tech care absolutely exists. The hospitals are physically there. Yet, for the average urban youth, the exorbitant cost makes it just as inaccessible as if it didn't exist at all. The outcome, a lack of adequate healthcare, is exactly the same, but the systemic roadblock causing it is entirely different. We see that exact same contrast with cultural development. Out in the rural areas, the problem is just an absolute deficit of recreation, which leads to apathy and pure boredom. The urban hazard is the exact opposite. Urban youth are completely surrounded by entertainment, but they face an unchecked influx of cultural chaos and alienation that can actively pull them away from constructive development. And there's another major sociological barrier in the cities: political mismanagement. Urban youth, filled with energy, but often lacking stable employment, are frequently exploited as political muscle. Rather than being developed as independent, creative citizens, they end up being utilized by various factions for their own gains. The text frames this strictly as an objective environmental hazard, a massive barrier that actively prevents youth from reaching their true developmental potential. Okay, let's pivot to some good news in Section 5, Pathways to Meaningful Solutions. We've seen the rural crisis of scarcity and the urban crisis of complexity, but we aren't just left with a list of problems. The source material gives us a very clear roadmap to get this demographic engine running again. So the crucial point is, how do we fix it? Step 1, the innovation of life-building, practical schooling. We're not just talking about rote memorization here, but education that includes real technical and vocational training to actually build self-reliance. Step 2, direct employment generation. This means decentralizing industries, actually bringing technical jobs back to the villages, and embracing diverse agriculture and tech, like specialized crop cultivation, so youth aren't just relying on outdated, limited farming methods. And that brings us to our final thought. The data and the sociology point to a very clear fork in the road. Will society commit to clearing the path for its youth, providing the education, the healthcare, and the moral framework they so desperately need? Or will it just stand by and let its absolutely greatest assets stall out and become its greatest crisis? It's a heavy question, but understanding these roadblocks is the first necessary step to removing them. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.